I'm here tonight to talk about Victory Gardens in World War II because that's a really important part of Austrian organic gardeners' heritage. It's the movement writ large is one of the origins of how your club came to be. So I'm here to use my expertise as a historian to provide some historical context about this and what the movement meant across the nation. And at the end of the talk, I'm going to actually hand over the reins to Angel and Madeline a bit because as a historian, I only have about half the story, and you guys, the local communities, hold the other half that aren't in the National and Federal Archives that I can't access because of quarantine and being unable to fly down to Austin to do research with you. So I really want this to be a discussion. Whenever I give talks, people always have the most wonderful stories of how they Victory Gardened as a child, about how their parents, sometimes their grandparents, Victory Gardened, what that was like. And I want everyone to feel really empowered to share those stories throughout, and especially as we conclude, and we can have a discussion together rather than me just yammering on the whole night. So this talk is titled Growing Victory, World War II's Backyard War Plants. And yes, that's me. I'm Anastasia Day, a historian at the University of Delaware. And you can email me any follow-up questions after the talk at my email address right there. You can find me on Twitter too, if that's the way you prefer to communicate. So here we go. Textbooks say that in 1943, Franklin Delano Roosevelt became the first president of the United States to travel by airplane when he flew to Morocco to meet Winston Churchill. To meet with Winston Churchill. He had known him for some time by then. America was in her third year of fighting on the side of the Allies against the Axis powers in World War II. General Dwight Eisenhower is promoted to command all US troops on European soil and directs the invasion of Sicily. In the Pacific, Japan suffered a sound defeat at the Battle of Guadalcanal. Future President John F. Kennedy was shipwrecked and then rescued by Solomon Islanders in a dugout canoe. Before the close of the year, the ENIAC computer project is formally under contract. The Tehran Conference has formalized plans for Operation Overlord, which later becomes known as D-Day. Eisenhower will then serve as Supreme Allied Commander for the invasion of Nazi-held France. That's the story from the history books. But what did Americans experience on the home front? What did you or your parents or your grandparents experience day to day back on the home? Most Americans were not in Tehran, thankfully. Most Americans were not shipwrecked with JFK. Most Americans were on the home front. And there was a lot more going on there. Just one slice, just in American music alone, the musical Oklahoma debuted. The song Pistol Packin' Mama, covered by Bing Crosby and the Andrews Sisters, was at the top of the charts, and Bobby Soxers went mad for Sinatra in Times Square. Leonard Bernstein conducted the New York Philharmonic and made front page news in the New York Times. It's not that the war wasn't present, that war was everywhere. What I'm here to talk about is probably the most common experience on the home front in World War II, besides donating to war bonds. Oh, come on, slide advance. Oh, I'm so sorry. Okay, here we go. Slide advance, there we go. Victory gardening. Victory gardens were, of course, the patches of earth that Americans cultivated in their backyards and community gardens or in the grounds of their workplace in order to supplement the family diet and stretch their ration points further. In 1943 alone, Gallup polls indicated that close to 21 million families planted 7 million acres of victory gardens across the United States. That's 2/3 of all American households. 6 out of 10, 3 out of 5 Americans. I'm guessing, I normally do this by show of hands, but if we were to do a show of hands of people that know that their family grew victory gardens in World War II, I've never seen less than 80% of an audience raise their hands. It seems like everyone has a story, and I'd love to hear some of them as the night goes on. So what is a victory garden? There we go. It is a garden from World War II. The Victory Garden program officially began on December 19th, 1941, at a conference called by Secretary of Agriculture Claude R. Wickard, less than 2 weeks after the attack on Pearl Harbor. That's how high a priority this was. A wide variety of government agencies were involved in this huge campaign, including the USDA, the Cooperative Agricultural Colleges Extension Service, the Office of Civilian Defense, and inevitably the Office of War Information, which coordinated most materials on the home front, as shown on this slide. In 1943, just a colossal number of, that was the height of the Victory Garden craze, as I stated before. But even more than the percentage of Americans who participated or the 7 million acres that were farmed, what really blows my mind is to think about how much food was grown in these. The USDA estimated that over 10 billion with a B pounds of food were grown in Victory Gardens in 1943, or 42% of the vegetables that Americans ate that year, which is simply incredible. Just for reference, the statistics today on the percentage of homegrown vegetables that make up in the US diet is somewhere around 0.02% of the vegetables Americans eat in the year, compared to 42% in 1943. An official, I wanted to include this report from my tiny state of Delaware to give another idea of how widespread it was. 90% of the people in Delaware planted 60,000 gardens in 1943, the newspaper notes, of which 10,000 were in the city of Wilmington alone. This is a remarkable achievement for one of the small states in the Union. If you keep reading in the quote, you'll notice that Rhode Island had 20,000 more gardens than Delaware, despite being the actual smallest state in the Union. So I guess that just goes to show that every joke you've heard about Delaware being a thoroughly mediocre state is quite true, then and now. By 1946, the formal Victory Garden movement ended as part of the transition to peace after war ended, of course, in 1945. However, the number of Americans gardening stayed constant around 17 million well into the 1950s, making gardening the #1 leisure activity in post-war America. So in case you haven't guessed, I like Victory Gardens. I have spent many years of my life studying Victory Gardens and researching them. But the very fact that I'm willing to do that shows that I'm abnormal. So why should normal functional people like you who have made better life choices care about Victory Gardens? This talk, I'm going to try and use the phenomena of Victory Gardens to explore a much bigger picture of the whole US home front in World War II and show how Victory Gardens are connected to all these bigger events and stories that illuminate, I think, the totality of the US home front war experience. So let's see how I can go from the particular Victory Garden to the huge by starting as small as possible. Let's start with the soil. So why did all these government agencies, and I'm sorry, it's being so stubborn on changing slides. Why did all these government agencies and 21 million families, I think I skipped a slide, I'm sorry, think that gardening was worth their time and effort? The answer was in the dirt. What do gardens do? They grow food, they make food. America didn't have any food shortages though. We actually broke records for highest yields ever produced by American farms for 7 consecutive growing seasons starting in 1939. So why would we need food? The answer is that we were feeding not only our own country, but a huge portion of the rest of the world. We were shipping food around the world, not only to our soldiers who have absolutely prodigious calorific needs, but also to our allies and to countries that were liberated after falling under Nazi rule. World War II was absolutely a war of production, most of it American, not only with food. Washington, D.C. knew by 1938 that, quote, any American involvement in another European war will be based on the strength of the United States economy and its potential for the production of military equipment, munitions, logistical services, and other scarce resources. And that's from FDR himself. As Europe lost factories and farmlands to the ravages of war and instability, America produced enough goods to support the Allies in Europe, Asia, the Pacific, as well as her own troops. Over half of total world manufacturing during World War II occurred in the United States. Food was absolutely crucial to this war by economic output. President Roosevelt asserted in a speech to Congress, food is as important as any other weapon in the successful prosecution of war. The food supply was paramount to other combatants too. Hitler's justification for his ill-fated expansion into Russia was the need for a larger base of food for the Third Reich. The Ukrainian bread basket was too tempting. He referred to this as Lebensraum, but the agricultural ideology is a huge motivation for Hitler. Armies march on their stomachs. Food was the fundamental basis of every wartime economy. The Victory Garden campaign was in turn a vital part of the US's nationwide drive for maximum food production. It is being so stubborn about changing slides. I'm sorry about that. Production was the ultimate goal of victory gardening and was encouraged using all the most modern methods of industrial endeavors and science-based technology. The Office of War Information urged radio announcers to emphasize to listeners that, quote, planting a victory garden is not enough. What counts in a victory garden is the yield. America needs the maximum that each garden can produce. The more food Americans could grow for themselves, the more food the US government could buy and sell to the Allies, leaving the rest of the world increasingly in our debt as well as well-fed. Victory gardens were often promoted and referred to as factories or war plants even. This quote that I have up on the screen right now is a typical quote from the pamphlets of the time. Quote, growing plants in a garden, any kind of plants, is actually a manufacturing process in which you and nature go into partnership. Like any manufacturing enterprise, it calls for a factory, raw materials, tools and equipment, labor, and intelligent management. Also an investment of some money, but more careful attention and continuing interest. And this is absolutely one of my favorite political cartoons from World War II ever. You can't quite see it so well in this black and white version, but the man is pointing at blueprints that look like they're supposed to be blueprints for a factory, but instead he's saying, this is where I'm going to plant turnips. And you'll note he's dressed more like a businessman than a farmer as well. While victory gardens were compared to factories, factories were also compared to victory gardens, is how far this rhetoric went. In this advertisement entitled Victory Garden in Detroit, industry itself is shown sprouting in straight lines. And you'll notice that these are all the names of factories in the city of Detroit. Below it, part of the text said, here's what automobile engineers say can come from that garden. Greater strength, and with it, greater safety. Just like regular victory gardens that fortified Americans with food. So in my opinion, most people who have looked at victory gardens in the past, most historians, I'm the first historian to be working on a book-length project about victory gardens, so it's just that no one has really thought to take them seriously before. They kind of miss this important story of how these gardens were presented as these industrial production factories. They often are chalked up as just being, oh, a way for everyone to feel like they were participating. Oh, isn't that nice? But gardening was serious business. And I think we do a serious disservice to the hard work and the millions of gardeners of World War II by not looking at how seriously the Victory Garden campaign presented itself. So we found our way from dirt to international policy, shipping food overseas, to thinking like a factory. But let's get back to the dirt. So what kind of dirt are we talking about? Where's the dirt? This question can take us in two directions. One direction is that dirt and ecosystems vary wildly across the United States. You cannot grow the same plants in the rainforest of Washington state as you would in Santa Fe or in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. I cannot plant the same plants on the same day up here in Massachusetts as you can in Austin, which is obvious, but does make the very idea of a national gardening program problematic. How can you make it national when gardening is so based on the particular? So this brings us back to the question of bureaucracy and this really thrilling slide, but hear me out, it's important. The Victory Garden program worked through extension agents almost exclusively, that's the right-hand straight down column, in rural areas, through the Office of Civilian Defense in cities, which is the left-hand column straight down. And in the middle column, that was local garden committees that filled in suburban areas or wherever the extension service didn't have access, nor was it a major municipality. Decentralizing in this way helped account for and incorporate regional differences in diet, climate, pre-existing gardening practices, local organizations that could help. The important thing to note is the general expansion in this time period. Government is getting bigger and affecting more people's lives more directly through a greater number of agencies during World War II. Another question, the second way we can take the question of location, though, is where the dirt is in the lives of victory gardeners themselves. For farmers, this question is easy. Farmers, many of whom already grew some of their own food for recreation or to save money, were now urged to set aside an even larger area for home food production on their farm, with the goal of becoming nearly as self-sufficient as possible for the duration of the war. Governor Prentice Cooper of Tennessee set the goal explicitly for his farmers in his home state, that over 80% of the food on every farm be grown on that farm, noting, quote, "This is a program which appeals to all, to the tenant farmer as well as to the farm owner, to the poor man as well as to the rich." However, most Americans weren't farmers. The majority of Americans had stopped living on farms as of the 1920 census. So where did the rest of America garden if not on their farm? Slide. The ideal location for a victory garden was in the backyard of your single-family detached home with a white picket fence somewhere that your 2.3 children and your terrier named Fido couldn't wreak havoc on it. The suburban, then as now, was presented as the ideal. Still, most Americans didn't have that either. The suburban expansion really came after the war, with the GI Bill helping people get home mortgages. You read about Levittown in New Jersey, which is the development scene pictured on this slide. In fact, millions of Americans were moving during the war, either to follow men in service to bases or into cities or other industrial centers where war jobs were to be found in factories. A lot of Americans lived in tiny, cramped, wartime worker housing or other forms of temporary housing. I have a picture here of a trailer park near a factory from World War II, where war workers were housed. And there were also huge programs to help people rent out their homes, share your home with us, home registration to help you say, yes, I have a spare room, I can host a war worker, and especially in these towns where new factories were popping up all over the place. But this doesn't answer the question, where do you put a garden? A, if you're moving all the time, and B, if you're in an apartment, where are the victory gardens in this trailer park in Missoula? So one answer to that is you had your garden at the factory itself. Many industrial war workers were given the option to work on plots at the site of their, at the site of their employment in the defense industries. Competitions with exacting standards for best kept employee plots were not uncommon, with cash prizes or Liberty bonds as the reward. Workers were told that it was patriotic too. They saved gas not getting to and from work, used getting to and from work by also locating their garden plot there. But this was not pure patriotism on the part of the corporations. They insisted that such a program was, quote, the best morale booster that man can devise for workers exhausted by long days indoors on the assembly line and increased rates of productivity. A representative of Firestone Tire and Rubber Company, who were huge proponents of company victory gardening, went on record saying, today, more than ever before, an increasing number of industries consider the welfare of their workers to be the fundamental responsibility of management. And industrial gardening gives every company an opportunity, especially important in war times, to aid both its workers and the nation. This, of course, puts the victory garden movement at a critical point in the history of corporate paternalism, where companies increasingly took responsibility for more and more of their workers' lives. An ideology that, when taken too far during the Gilded Era, housed workers in company towns and resulted in colossal work unrest and union strikes. I'm sure we've all heard about companies that issued their own currency, and all of the only groceries you could buy were from the company store, also owned by your employer who was giving you your paycheck. So labor historians then have a lot to learn from victory gardening in terms of a revival of corporate paternalism and thinking about how employers relate to labor unrest, which there was a surprising amount of during World War II because of the tremendous amount of overwork. The culmination of these industry efforts came in the form of the National Victory Garden Institute, which focused on fostering the alliance between industry and government through shared war garden efforts. The National Victory Garden Institute sponsored company gardens, community gardens hosted on company property, and worked to generally propagandize for the cause. Their officers and trustees represented such corporations as Sears Roebuck, Shell Oil, Metropolitan Life Insurance, Bankers Trust, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. The president of the U.S. Pacific Railroad was the chair of the Institute. This perfectly illustrates the tight bonds between, oh, I'm so sorry about this, between government and industry that are being cemented during World War II. No longer a competitor of the government, private efforts were proving an extension of government efforts and often vice versa. From the modern perspective, we can see how crucial the collaboration of private and public was to the success of the Victory Garden movement, which is a less intuitive sight of the same exact sort of thing that's happening with the burgeoning military-industrial complex during World War II. That same exact story you can see in the Victory Garden movement. Because, of course, none of these companies are logical leaders in gardening. However, to get back to where Victory Gardens are located, not all Victory Gardens were located at places of employment. In cities, citizens petitioned for the right to turn abandoned lots into community gardens. The sacrosanct grounds of such prestigious estates as the Schwab Estate, located on Riverside Drive in Manhattan, were opened up for community gardening. And that's the picture on the upper left. Time magazine incredulously reported in 1943 that, quote, every unprotected piece of ground is being dug up for Victory Gardens. In Boston's Copley Square and the Portland, Oregon Zoo, in Chicago's Arlington Racetrack and in the Wellesley College campus, New York's Schwab Estate and the Naval Air Station and Olathe, Kansas. Everybody was busy tucking seeds to bed in the moist spring soil. Movie stars, soldiers, admirals, airline hostesses, nuns, and prisoners. Even the front of the town hall in San Francisco was plowed up for the use of community members, as you can see on the bottom right. Chicago, however, set the highest bar across the nation. In 1941, their municipal program promoted 547 community gardens and parks and lots across the city, each at least 75 by 100 feet and serving 4 or more families. Then they protected the gardens against trespassers and hoodlums with municipal ordinances levying fines and even possible jail time for sabotaging Victory Garden efforts. In 1942, Chicago quadrupled those efforts. Hilariously enough, when you go into the archives, there's letters from the organizers of the City of Chicago Victory Garden movement to the Secretary of Agriculture saying that you must be trying to sabotage the Victory Garden movement because you're setting goals that are too modest and not vigorous enough. Everyone should be doing at least what Chicago is doing. So they're accusing the Secretary of Agriculture in the United States basically of treason because they thought that everyone should be attempting at least as much as Chicago. Another place where Victory Gardens were likely to be found was in schools and youth organizations. Schools would use adjacent land to the school building in the suburbs, and in urban schools, they would even put garden on rooftops, as in this one of my absolute favorite pictures. They have matching sun hats. That hoe is at least twice as tall as the little girl using it, and she does not look happy to be gardening. I just adore this photo. Unsurprisingly, perhaps, the 4-H club system was a huge proponent of the Victory Garden movement. Schools were eager to use this as an opportunity not only for hands-on learning, but also to reconnect children with their American roots. American schools and 4-H gardening materials alike connected children's horticulture to the legacy of the American gardener, founder, and President Thomas Jefferson. Jefferson had dreamed of an America of, quote, yeoman farmers, where every citizen owned his own patch of land and maintained his sense of Americanness and citizenship through the effort of raising his own crops and food. That was increasingly out of reach for most Americans because of urbanization, but Victory Gardens were one way for children to reconnect with the earth the way Jefferson had wanted his yeoman farmer to do, and receive that education in the soil. One 4-H club pamphlet read, quote, "There is no higher tribute 4-H members can pay to Thomas Jefferson than to do all they can in producing and conserving food. I hope they will follow his example by taking advantage of every opportunity to apply science and modern technology in the practice of victory gardening." Oops, went 2 at once now, so just can't get it right. There we go. But let's pull ourselves away from the American yeoman farmer and back into the dirt. How were these gardens arranged? There's one big theme in common with these two plot garden designs and the design of the children's garden on the last slide. It's rows. They loved rows. Traditional American kitchen gardening for home consumption had previously been based on the English bed gardening system. You would generally have a patch of parsley, a rectangular bed of carrots, a bed of bush beans growing in bunches. Previously, it was a mark of agriculture, not gardening, to use straight rows. Rows are exponentially more efficient for large-scale industrial and especially mechanized agriculture because they achieve a high efficiency of labor. But as the recent square foot gardening trend points out, beds are much more efficient in terms of production per square foot. If production of the food was the only end goal, then how come I have not been able to find a single garden design sketch or plan of advice that suggests anything except rows? The answer is that Americans were seeking to emulate industrial agriculture as closely as possible. Their logic went that what worked for farmers should also work for gardeners. Furthermore, within the metaphor of garden as factory, the rows became, and they were called this, assembly lines of vegetable production. And thus gardeners were emulating the industrial production methods of the factories they worked in, as well as through their use of rows. Indeed, to a certain degree, slide please, come on. The entire revolution that happened in American farming practices in the early 20th century can be read in the distinctly and self-consciously modern practices of World War II victory gardeners. Let's take it back to the dirt. Soil science was crucial in the revolution in farming. At the end of the 19th century and dawn of the 20th, scientists began to discover that there were chemical components of soil that seemed more important than others to plant productivity. By the time of World War II, these were enshrined as the holy trinity of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Of these, nitrogen is by far the most important, but only through the Haber-Bosch process, invented in 1910, was one able to industrially produce nitrogen in liquid form out of the plentiful nitrogen in our atmosphere. The first commercial chemical fertilizer in the US hit the market in 1926. As you can see in the 7 steps to your victory garden, by 1945, victory gardeners were universally encouraged to add fertilizer to their crops, even despite the wartime shortages of nitrogen. And that's because the Haber-Bosch process is also crucial for creating the nitro part of nitroglycerin in gunpowder and explosives. The manure and compost of yesteryear were unacceptably primitive soil enrichment techniques, even in a time of war shortages. In this slide, the Bethlehem Steel Mills is boasting that they fertilized employee plots with 85,000 tons of sulfate of ammonia, produced as a byproduct of using coke in their blast furnaces. Another way for heavy industry to profit off victory gardening, though, lies in the big mass contraption in the 7th step to a victory garden. The development in soil science tied both agriculture and gardening ever closer to the chemical industries through now standard use of chemical pesticides, fungicides, and herbicides for weeds. Chemicals I found recommended for the victory gardener to use include rhodonone, nicotine sulfate, sulfur compounds, calcium arsenate, Paris green, Bordeaux mixture, lime dust cryolite, talc, carbon disulfide, lead arsenate, and to top it off, Arthur E. Hutchins of the University of Minnesota Horticultural Department suggested starting Chinese soy sprouts in formaldehyde. Start your seeds in formaldehyde, guys. Yum, yum. If this was happening in gardens, I'm assuming you can only imagine the proliferation of chemical applications being used in industrial agriculture at this time, well documented by historians of agriculture. What you may not suspect is the simultaneous proliferation of these chemicals as weapons in the military war, a pattern that would lead one day to the chemical in Agent Orange as applied to the forests of Vietnam in Operation Ranch Hand, being repackaged as what we all know today as Roundup. There's an excellent book called War in Nature that discusses the very disturbing history between the production of agricultural chemicals and the production of chemical weapons, and how World War II is absolutely crucial in that horrifying development. But chemical sprays and fertilizers weren't the only product of the American chemical industry and scientific farming that Americans were encouraged to buy. They were encouraged to buy gardening tools of all shapes and sizes, consumerism that would go rampant in a post-war world. Business Week even took time out to note the profits reaped by purveyors of gardening tools during the war. They reported dealers say that enthusiasts are buying as many tools as they think they could possibly use and have boosted demand to 4 times that of 1941. One can also see the roots of the post-war consumerist boom in those who worked, all the various advertisers who worked to promote Victory Gardens, even without benefiting from garden-related purchases. Manufacturers of consumer goods, counting on generating brand loyalty and recouping their consumers in a much anticipated post-war period of prosperity, promoted Victory Garden movement throughout the war. Such firms as Lifebuoy Soap, Standard Oil, Firestone Tire Company, and Kotex sanitary napkins, Windex window cleaner, and Coca-Cola are just a few more examples, besides the ones in this slide, of the varied industries capitalizing on this opportunity for popular patriotism. Naturally, though, the horticulture and agricultural industries were preeminent. International Harvester, for instance, plowed up hundreds of acres for Victory Gardens in Chicago for free. Even companies like Beech Nut Packing Company, Del Monte Foods, and Green Giant Canned Vegetables worked to teach people how to grow food at home, the very same food that they would hope to sell them at the war's end. One final purchase of great importance for all gardeners was seeds. Something I haven't had the chance to research yet as fully as I'd like is exactly what varietals of vegetables Victory gardeners were growing, and how the spread of hybrid seeds migrates from being almost exclusively on the farm to, after World War II, everyone is growing hybrid varietals in high-yield hybrid varietals in their backyard vegetable gardening. It appears that Victory Gardens were pivotal in this distribution of this biological technology, again, from the farm to the backyard. The constant threats of seed shortages throughout the early part of the war were important to this story. The US had formerly imported most of our seed. The domestic seed industry expanded wildly during this time. It seems clear that Victory gardeners were being urged to plant, in particular, plenty of cabbage, carrots, root vegetables, and only on rare occasions where you had an excess of space, possibly potatoes, all because they could be kept in a root cellar or basement in the days before refrigerators were found in every home in America. So let's follow this train of thought and follow the vegetables out of the ground and into the kitchen. What was done with them? Americans learned to eat vegetables in huge quantities during the war, thanks in part to new food science, which had just recently discovered vitamins, and experts were shoving the importance of vitamins down everyone's throats. The first RDA, Recommended Dietary Allowances Guidelines, came out in 1943. And this was hugely important in helping propagandize the Victory Garden movement. So a lot of vegetables went straight into bellies. The biggest difference between shopping for food and growing your own, though, is of course seasonal availability. Your tomato plant won't have as many tomatoes as the grocery store in February if you live in Nebraska. The solution to this was canning. Industrial canning preceded home canning methods, starting in the early mid-19th century and coming into mass production at the end of that century, about when home canning began. Prior to that, your jar of food in the cellar better be pickled in vinegar, fermenting like sauerkraut, or dried and salted in order to keep all winter long. Thus, most people, especially in cities, had actually never home canned before World War II. Canning really was mostly a factory technology. As long as they could have canned themselves, they were also able to buy canned products from the store. Women made large community cooperatives to share the use of pressure cookers, which were simply industrial canning machines scaled down for domestic use. The widespread canning of vegetables in World War II has an important role, therefore, in the history of food technology and the transition over the 20th century to increasingly processed food, gratefully bought from a store once the war was over. Finally, let's take a look at the gardeners themselves. Victory gardens are a really interesting lens through which to view gender in World War II. Men were presented as both foreman and factory worker of the vegetable war plant, while women were the harvesters, processors, and in charge of preparing food for private consumption, as we just saw in those pictures of women canning. One stark visual equation of gardening with masculinity is a 1944 cartoon where a man is looking at his wall of mounted animal heads, hammer and nails in hand. His wife whispers, "Gerald is preparing a place for his victory garden trophies." Looking at this salute to a clear-headed American ad and others more martial, many scholars have interpreted the masculine bent to victory gardening as tied up in military metaphors of fighting on the home front. Men who were unable to serve could still fight the Japanese, just Japanese beetles, not people. However, it also affirmed the masculinity of males as a provider. Gerald, with his trophy wall, prepares to display the fruits of his victory gardening efforts alongside what looks like an elephant foot ashtray and other such tokens of masculine efforts to master nature. This effort to masculinize gardening was necessary because historically men had been farmers out in the field while women were gardeners. Off the farm, men needed to be convinced on the US home front that gardening wasn't effeminate. Conversely, promoters needed to show that in a civilized indoor age, gardening out of doors wouldn't turn the housewife into a he-man. The first step in the task was maintaining distinctions between the two gender roles. One packet did this by referring to, quote, husband gardeners, who will need cooperation from the kitchen department in the Victory Garden Vegetable Factory, which is my nomination for the most insulting way to refer to a life partner I have come across in many years of looking through the archive. This cartoon shows a similar move. The female does the nurturing watering, while the man is left the task of the architectural construction type work of staking out tomatoes. And that relationship was predicated on heteronormative sexual attraction. However, there's still a strong current of conventional ideas about women working. The Victory Garden movement had turned backyard weeding into a wartime factory job. Therefore, because it was real work, women were ideally absent. One of the best illustrations of this, paradoxically, is the use of a female in a photo essay accompanying an article addressed explicitly to a male gendered gardener. Quote, Mrs. William Wyatt, a pretty and practical housewife, end quote, wears a beruffled polka dot and floral print apron with actually pretty cute pumps. Note her white gloves, light colored dress, and white heels with dark trim, which never get dirty throughout the photo spread. Properly married, identified only by her husband's name, dressed both modestly and femininely, Mrs. William Wyatt served as the equivalent of bikini-clad babes stretched out on men's sports cars in ads today. Except Mrs. Wyatt wasn't selling sex. She was selling comforting gender normativity in a changing world, where Rosie the Riveter threatened the monopoly of Susie homemakers. Turns out, who works in the dirt and wearing what can tell you a lot about the relationship between men and women in this time. How do we remember victory gardening today? The popular legacy of victory gardening in World War II is that of a 20th century revival of this pre-industrial yeomanry, Jeffersonian type. In this age of slow food, locavorism, increased awareness, and anxiety around food origins, victory gardens are often eulogized as a model for contemporary grassroots, organic, and urban gardening movements. I find it particularly funny that they're unfortunately now out of business, was a goat milk confectionery shop in Brooklyn, of course, named the Victory Garden, which I screenshotted in the lower right. Attention to the material realities of victory gardening suggests a different narrative, a narrative where victory gardens were not located on romantic homesteads, but on railroad easements. They were fertilized not with manure, but they were supposed to be fertilized not with manure, but with chemical fertilizers. The program doesn't seem to have emerged spontaneously from the American citizenry, but instead from a complex bureaucratic tangle of ever bigger growing government in DC. So cue obligatory pun about how I hope our investigations have proved fruitful, how maybe I've helped give you the real dirt on World War II victory gardens. Hopefully not that I've made vegetables of all of you with this rant. I did want to include a little more context, not just about victory gardening, which is one origin of AOG, but also Japanese American incarceration during World War II, to help provide context for AOG's Yamaguchi Garden, which I will let Angel share some information about. Because this is a crucial part that you really can't talk about World War II without addressing. Wartime Order number 9066 was issued on February 19th, 1942. It ordered over 120,000 Americans of Japanese American ancestry in the United States, mostly from the West Coast, to be removed and incarcerated on what are commonly today referred to as concentration camps. Scholars also, and the Smithsonian and the World War II Museum also use the term Japanese American incarceration over internment, especially because 62% of those who were imprisoned were actual US citizens. So it cannot be internment of a foreign agent or alien when 62% were full US citizens. And that's in an age when it was not easy for Japanese Americans to become American citizens. In 1944, in what is commonly referred to as one of the most shameful rulings that is ever issued, up there with the Dred Scott decision, the US Supreme Court upheld the constitutionality of Order 9066 by ruling against Fred Korematsu's appeal for violating an exclusion order. In 1988, President Ronald Reagan signed into law the Civil Liberties Act of 1988, which apologized for internment on behalf of the US government and authorized a payment of $20,000, which is equivalent to around $45,000 in 2019, to each former internee who was still alive when the act was passed. The legislation admitted that these government actions were based on, quote, race prejudice, war hysteria, and a failure of political leadership. Unfortunately, Texas has a sizable part to tell in this story. As you can see on the map of incarceration sites, there were 4 facilities in the state of Texas, one of them being Crystal City. And I included a map of the camp here to give you an idea of just how military this was, how this absolutely was not a vacation, to put it shortly. This was unconstitutional, unlawful, and immoral. And they were surrounding people with barbed wire, as you can see. One of the interesting features about Crystal City is that it was a family detention center and also included, people don't know that descendants of German American heritage and Italian American heritage, although to a much smaller degree, were also incarcerated. So I want to just give a little bit of context for the gardening that happened in these camps.
What did you get?
Many of the relocated Japanese Americans. Oh, can everyone see?
Yes.
Okay, great. Many of the Japanese Americans who were relocated, especially from California, were actually gardeners in the first place, in part due to a long history of American racism, which ensured that only high labor and self-employing jobs were available for Japanese American immigrants. Since Order 9066 specified that incarcerated persons could only take that which you could carry, they were forced to sell off huge amounts of land in some of the richest gardening places in California to colossal landed interests in fruit and vegetables. And a little known fact about Order 9066 is that the United Fruit Packaging Corporation, at the time one of the biggest companies in the United States, lobbied President Roosevelt directly for Japanese American incarceration in order to further their interests in obtaining this land. Oops, I'm sorry. That's not quite yet. So many of the people who made it to incarceration camps were themselves gardeners. That being said, it was a colossal change of landscape from California, which was much closer to a Japanese climate that's the minority of actual Japanese immigrants as opposed to American-born Japanese Americans in the camps versus the arid US Southwest and Texas. So despite those changes, gardening is what they knew and gardening is what they turned to. I included some images here from a scrapbook, which was made by Mary F. Clark, who, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Now it's flipping too well. A scrapbook made by Mary F. Clark, who was an incarcerated person at Crystal City. The top of the page reads, by 1944, almost every building in camp was hidden by a mess of greenery. Little bridges, rock gardens, goldfish ponds were everywhere, as were all kinds of flowers, vines, shrubs, and quick-growing trees. I also included this painting, which is painted by Taichi Tsuyuki. It's a painting also of Crystal City Family Internment Camp. It was presented to Taro George Masuda by his Shingen students upon his departure from the camp. And the message in Japanese reads, "We have been together for a long time. We hope to meet someday." So the fact that on his fond going away card, the painting that they wanted to include was of their gardens says a huge amount about the emotional resonance of gardening on the camps. I figured that if someone else has already written in ways that moved me to tears about this, I might as well quote them very briefly. So I'm just going to read a very quick excerpt from Kenneth Helpand's Defiant Gardens, which talks about the role of the garden in Japanese American camps, incarceration camps. Garden making in the camps was the domestication of an inhospitable environment. Camps were home, but only for an indeterminate period. Internees worked to create cultural setting that fostered a semblance of normalcy under abnormal and unjust conditions. Gardens offered the dignity of work, opportunities for the expression of individual creativity, and a shared cultural identity. The beauty of the gardens offered solace and a contrast with an alien environment. However admirable and beautiful these creations, the frame delineates and completes the picture. The wall for all of these gardens was a barbed wire fence with guard towers, searchlights, and guns pointed inward. All these gardens, grand and small, were acts of resistance, directed toward the maintenance of cultural integrity and self-respect. They were tangible symbols of hope that helped people survive their internment, fostered their mental and physical health, and were a demonstration of psychological and also political defiance. The gardens further offered an assertion of cultural identity that contrasted dramatically with the conditions of incarceration and the withholding of basic American freedoms. In a sense, the gardens were the anti-camp, a subversive response to internment, where individual and collective gestures were a way of denying the camp administration and environment. And I think that puts it really beautifully how important gardening was in this environment. So hopefully when Angel fills us in with a little context about the Yamaguchi garden that AOG has, that will help make sense of why it was so important for Mr. Yamaguchi to continue gardening after the war and what meaning that gardening might have held for him. I just wanted to shout out this new book that came out just this year, Nature Behind Barbed Wire, An Environmental History of Japanese American Incarceration, for anyone who's interested in reading more on the subject. It's the first full-length book study of environmental history of Japanese American incarceration. So I wanted to make sure that that resource was available for people who wanted to learn more. Okay, here's the problem with just about everything I just told you, the entire talk I've given so far. There are a couple problems, I'm not perfect, but here's the biggest one. It's from the top down. It's from what's been collected and been saved in national and federal archives, mostly published materials from large coastal cities and federal government sources. Even photos, while suggestive, are usually posed. Take, for example, this photograph from the UK. However, this photograph also captures, I think, is suggestive of what I think is most missing from my project, what many historians are missing inevitably in most histories, and what is often least preserved in the archives. That is what people were thinking, what they were feeling, what the actual lived experience was like. Just think of today about how during the coronavirus, it will be so difficult, I know, for me to communicate to my children or grandchildren the ongoing anxiety and pressure of being homebound and seeing the news we see every single day. There's no amount of newspaper clippings that will possibly convey the way that we have experienced it in real life. For garden history in particular, not even diaries are helped because they're often such a part of daily life that people don't journal about them. I'm an avid gardener, and basically the only time gardening pops up in my journal is when I'm writing notes to self, or maybe sometimes when I'm ranting about how angry I am that the cutworms got all the tomatoes. But not nearly the degree that a historian would need to really write a bottom-up history. The other part of what's missing in the archive, what people are living, what people are feeling, is who those people are. A colossal problem with the story I am able to tell about victory gardening is just how white it is. And I love to point to the salute to a clear-headed American image as an example of how literally whitewashed the gardening movement was. There were not national propaganda posters featuring any people of color or minoritized persons to promote victory gardening. The ideal victory gardener was always presented as white, whether man or woman. So the experiences of people of color, often, as the Japanese American incarcerated gardeners remind us, truly brutal and horrific experiences are often missing or very difficult to find in the archive. And this is part of where you all come in. So Austin Organic Gardeners, you have the potential to be a crucial part of helping me round out my story and helping other historians build histories from the ground up. This club has borne witness to and been a part of so much history, from its powerful and fascinating World War II origins, before organic was really, let alone a popular concept like a coherence concept. It was one of many words floating around at the time for what now organic means. Through to the countercultural gardening of the 60s and 70s, through to the industrialization and standardization of organic, and especially organic certifications in the 1990s and 2000s, and so much more. In particular, because I'm a World War II historian, we're in the last stages of being able to talk to people who lived through World War I homefront and victory gardening. We're in the perfect time right now to be gathering histories of the second half of the 20th century and the early 21st. So here's my thanks to you for letting me speak tonight. The images are part of the thank you. So if you got nothing else from this talk, you've now seen Superman harvesting cabbages and Captain America punching Nazis in the face. And I'm happy to go on the record to say I approve of punching Nazis in the face. I endorse that by use of this image. But also, I want to thank you with an offer. I had originally really wanted to try and tailor this talk specifically to your club. I couldn't do that because the digitized collections were not available. I could not travel down to see you. There was not enough information for me to work with to even make this talk very specific to the state of Texas even. But your history is super valuable and important. There are very, very few community gardens still operating from the time of World War II. And just to prove how important they are, one of the only other ones, which is the Boston Fenway Gardens, has a formal collection of something like 20 linear feet worth of papers housed at the Massachusetts Historical Society that have been used for multiple scholarly articles and papers. So I took the liberty of researching your local universities, and I happened to find two professors in your vicinity. One of them is Megan Rady at the University of Texas at Austin Department of History. She's an environmental historian that I actually know pretty well. And the other is Professor Nancy Burlage, the director of the Public History Program at Texas State University. And she is an agricultural historian. And as someone interested in public history with students in a public history program, I would like to offer, with your permission, to reach out to these two people and let them know that I think this organization would be a phenomenal candidate for a student or maybe a class worth of students' projects in taking oral histories or otherwise working to promote and preserve local heritage. But until then, the rest of the time I'm here, I want to cede some time, cede some space, and hear from you all on the ground about your club, its history, its heritage, which is such an honor. And I have one more small gift. I couldn't resist adding it. Meet Cookie, the Victory Garden monkey. I just love Cookie so much. I don't love that Cookie is in chains, but I love that Cookie loved gardening. So thank you all so much.
Thank you.
That was terrifically interesting. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. That was so great.
We would be more than thrilled to be a student project for that. So yes, lead on.
Then I'm very happy to contact my two associates. So I will do that and let them know that it put you guys on their radar screens for if they're looking for public history projects for students.
Okay, well, I'm going to share a few slides and talk a little bit about what we have going on at Zilker Botanical. Let's see. Okay. Everyone see my screen?
Nope.
No?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay. Let's see. I have a new laptop, so still. Sorry, guys. I have to give it permission. Shoot.
So Anastasia, where did you get a lot of this information from?
The bulk of my research has been done at the National Archives in College Park, Maryland, also known as NARA2. And then I had a fellowship at the Smithsonian Institute, and they have colossal collections in American national history. So that's part of why, just from the limits of my sources, I'm telling a really national story, very top down, very focused on these large national efforts, but absolutely a priority of mine once I defend this dissertation and think about turning this into a book is fleshing out so much more the bottom up, from reading everything from diaries and letters to the editor, to looking through photo collections, because sometimes photos can tell you a deceptive amount, even if they are staged. And that's a colossal priority. Yeah, while Angel works out technical issues, I'd love to answer questions if anyone has any, or if they want to share a Victory Garden story from their family or where they know Victory Gardens might have been, where they grew up or elsewhere in Austin.
Yes, we're muting everyone just as a course, but if you have a question or something, go ahead and unmute yourself and ask a question or raise your hand.
Yeah, can y'all hear me?
Yes.
I just thank you for bringing up the Japanese internment camps. I was driving during this meeting, so I apologize if I missed something, but I was wondering if you could tell us more about like Texas's role in that.
That's an absolutely great question. So Texas was home to 4 different incarceration sites, and what is it's hard to say there's any good news. But in terms of Texans' complicity with the expulsion and denial of rights to Japanese Americans, they were not within the critical zone from which Japanese Americans were evacuated. In my map, for instance, the entirety of Alaska was depopulated of Japanese American citizens, of which there were a surprising amount because it was so close. California was a colossal site for deporting. However, Texas was very crucial as a storage space. And unfortunately, one of the ways it was crucial was precisely because of the inhospitable environments that Texas was able to provide, because they wanted to make life difficult and alienating for these poor people. I unfortunately know little more than that about Texas's specific role, partially because this was a federal program. There was a new federal agency created called the War Relocation Agency, WRA, and it was administrated very much from DC. So this was not the work of any local Texas state governors or authorities of any sort. This was very much a federal project.
I see that Nora has her hand raised.
Yeah, I wondered about, I was interested to learn that there was such an emphasis on using chemicals in the garden, both pesticides and also as soil amendments. And I was wondering about I know this isn't your area, but about the rise of organic gardening, and when was that precede this, after this, or how that fits in with Victory Gardens and gardening in general?
Oh, this is such a great question. So some of the first recorded popular uses of organic to mean what we think it means today really start with J.R. Rawdale and the Rodale Press. Anyone here still fans, subscribe? You probably have read, seen some of their publications. They do great stuff. They also have great corporate archives, but they're very hard to access. You have to ask permission. It's a whole thing. I'll get there someday. But J.R. Rawdale starts his press up in 1942. So something that I really want to explore in future iterations of this project is exactly how the World War II boom and transition of all of a sudden these chemicals that are in the backyard is also the same moment that opposition to those chemicals is really birthed. Before that, there was not really a distinction between organic farming or gardening versus conventional, what we now know as conventional farming or gardening. There was just the way things were done, and here's one scientific tool you can use or not. And it wasn't morally freighted. The long-term impacts were not understood as well of specific chemical applications. It was just thought that science was a fantastic tool that, would help. So organic really,
I saw that.
That was a really great idea. Yeah.
Okay. So I learned about some of the Zilker Garden history more recently at a luncheon that kicked off kind of the Zilker Conservancy's role in kind of taking over the garden. And so we can go to the second slide. So Zilker Garden is, in my opinion, it's a great place to continue to reimagine and keep digging and digging for creating a community space. And so several years ago, we began doing demonstration and education gardens in Zilker Botanical. And as I've been there even less than a year, you can go back, Madeline. I'll tell you when to go to the next one.
Okay.
So as I've been involved with the organic gardeners, I've seen a lot of these greatest generations gardening clubs just kind of fall apart and become completely, abandoned. And we were asked to take over larger and larger plots of area in the garden. And Madeline and I we're hanging in there. We have the privilege of time, and so we are able to spend a lot of time over there and really tend to the gardens. And so, one day we went to a luncheon where we learned about Isamu Taniguchi, who is responsible for the Japanese garden at Zilker, and he built it in his 60s. And it's a real inspiration to see that one person built this, and it's one of the more beautiful views of downtown Austin. And so during World War II, He was incarcerated with his family for 3+ years in Crystal City. And at the same time, his sons were drafted into the US Army. And so we can go to the next slide now. So after the war, he was a farmer in the Rio Grande Valley, and his sons moved to Austin to go to UT and eventually became architects. One later became the dean of the architecture school. He moved to Austin after retirement, and through some loose arrangements with his connections with his sons being involved doing architecture projects with the Parks Department of City, he was able to, without a salary or any kind of formal contract, in 18 months, like transform this beautiful caliche hillside into a beautiful, peaceful garden. And, you know, he was deeply affected by the war and his internment. And this was a gift to the city and to Austinites to try to restore some balance and create a place of reflection and peace after so many years of racial discord and conflict. And so Taniguchi's grandson started the Zilker Conservancy and will eventually, over 5 years, take over full operations of Zilker Botanical Garden. And if you want to learn more about this story, the Texas Historical Commission put together a really beautiful video. It's linked on the Zilker Botanical Garden website, and you can also just search for it on YouTube. It's called The Spirit of the Garden by Isamu Taniguchi. And so it's just a beautiful story. I was really inspired to tears hearing about it. And, you know, while we can't, you know, meet in the clubhouse right now, and we don't know like how long that's going to be, I think that, you know, as things are opening up a little bit more, we can continue to social distance, share our gardening knowledge. And we've moved our work day, our volunteer day in the Zilker to Saturday. And so, you know, we want to invite anyone that's interested. You can email us at the email that I have below to join us on Saturdays as we transform our current garden, I guess our summer garden beds, into a fall victory garden. And so Madeline came up with a brilliant idea to do a 1945 victory garden as a teaching, you know, like similar to some of the things that Anastasia showed us, like the very row gardens, and right next to it, a more modern organic garden that's using a lot of the new techniques. And so Madeline put together a plan. So I'll let you go take it from here because, yes, go Madeline.
Thank you. Austin Organic Gardeners have been tending the vegetable demonstration area in the Pioneer Village for years. I did try to ask Russell and other members how long we have been tending them, but really just in the spring we were asked and we were able to take over the center island. The beds are in a horseshoe shape around this center island, which is the full sun part of the garden, at least the front of it, which is the front of it is the part where the numbers are on the screen where you see. So the front, looking at it, when you come down the steps from the clubhouse where you pay admission, will be along the front. So on the left, you see the rows very much like you saw on the plans for the Victory Gardens. That is also all that I saw. And I also saw them planted at very specific spacings. I'm going to go back just quickly to, this was something that I found. I was looking for heirloom seed varieties, which I did find. We have Country Gentleman corn growing in our Three Sisters garden right now. And I was surprised to really recognize a lot of the heirloom seeds that are still available today. And you can see even on this seed catalog how it has a Victory Garden planting chart and how they were supposed to be organized. There were worksheets that went out, and there was really a right way to do this. This is from the Illinois, I can't read it at the bottom, but it is like the Department of Defense for a family of 5. And that is what I used as the model for our garden. And it has major crops at every 3 feet. So you can see we have the cabbage and the lima beans and the tomatoes, kohlrabi, mounded at 3 feet, and then follow-on crops, frost-tolerant crops, in the furrows at 18 inches. So it works to every 18 inches are where crops are grown. I was pleased to find some intercropping. So even on this plan, even though it's not legible above the farmer and the V, it does recommend to mix radish seeds in with the root crops. And you can see that some of the rows, like between 4 and 5, are part carrot and part shallot. They do intercrop, or they do plant in herbs as we do in organics. So between 7 and 8, we have some parsley and some dill. They have the alliums in as well. But you can see no flowers, definite, all about vegetables there. And beans on, we added a cattle panel arch, which we are really enjoying, some vertical gardening. You can see that kind of in the middle above 2 compost piles, 2 compost, above ground composters that we have on the ground, and we open those lids when it rains so that that good, almost like compost tea, leaches down into the ground around those compost piles and is helping to organically feed the soil. And that's what we do in organics, is feed the soil, and our plants know what to do. On the 2020 side, you can see definitely the contrast of not all the rows were planted more in groupings. Traditionally, we have alliums on the perimeters of our beds, as Tim Miller has taught us to do. We have that several places in our garden already, and I'm sure we will replicate that. But I did some nasturtiums there at the front. And then you can see our square foot garden here. And our square foot garden is in the bricked area below the broccoli and cauliflower. So we have an Oya right in the center of our 5x5 garden with a bean teepee around it. That's how we grow at school. We have 5x5 beds that we grow in the square foot method. I don't have the square foot method numbers on this plan, but in a lot of online planners, if you can turn on a square foot function, and it will tell you how many plants are needed. But there is a lot of information online on the square foot gardening, which is a more bio-intensive method for smaller urban backyards. Growing more plants, shading out weeds. I have really enjoyed that for planning and for growing. So we have a tortilla soup theme for our square foot garden, and that's the main area that we will share on our fall garden series, our video series on our Facebook page. So we don't confuse people too much with this whole plan. But I did also want to mention that we're able in our modern gardens to have areas. There's a focus on pollinators and insects. And we do have a bit of a shady corner in this lower right-hand corner. So we will have chamomile there, and there's mustard behind it. And then a cover crop, a soil building mixture that we were inspired. We have grown cover crops on the hugel culture bed in the demonstration areas. In the past, David Kramer has taught us several things. We've done radishes, we've done fenugreek, we've done several different, we did just all cilantro last year, but this will be a soil building mix, since this is really our first fall in this whole area. So we are still building the soil here. We really enjoy, learning and honing our skills in the demonstration area as we garden together, almost like a mentorship program where the older gardeners have so much information for us. I joined specifically because I was a volunteer parent at school doing a school garden, and I absolutely, have enjoyed it and apply all that we learn to being able to have, a harvest for the kids and learning organic techniques. Angel?
Yeah, so that's beautiful, Madeline. I love the plan. I'm super excited to dig in there with you. And I can throw up the email again if anybody needs to write it down. But yeah, so if you have free time on Saturdays, please join us.
I do want to just mention, I'm sorry, that right now during COVID, the gardeners the manager of the garden has asked that we have a maximum of 6 people in the work group. We're doing small groups. We're doing 3 areas, and we rotate through those areas so people can practice different tasks in the garden. So please do email. And if a lot of people want to come, it's possible we could do 2 shifts on a Saturday. Thank you.
Are you wearing masks?
Yes.
And could I ask a question about the 2 different areas? So you're doing a 1945 and a 2020. I assume you're not using pesticides in the 1945. And
No.
is the only difference between the 45 and the 2020 is just the layout of the plants? Are you using the same fertilizers? Everything else is the same? What's different between 45 and besides the layout?
Yes, everything else is the same. I've seen several videos just really enlightening, even where the kids are doing a lot of the work in the gardens where the pesticides are really prescribed, different pesticides for each plants. But no, we have an organic garden, and this really is to inspire people to garden, to show them what they can do, and to carry on gardening. This urge to garden and urge to connect with place during these times. So it's really for inspiration. Also, because 1945 is the year that Austin Organic Gardeners was established, and we're celebrating our 75th year.
And do you garden in this garden? Will you garden year round?
Yes, we do.
And they social distance too.
Yes, social distance. It has really helped me to get in a rhythm of when to begin starting plants and throwing out seeds. Some of our more experienced people say the timing for that, for succession gardening, to keep the soil active, even if it's a cover crop.
Yeah, I'd like to mention, since Madeline brought up that our club was formed in 1945 by our co-founders, Josephine and Charles Huntley. And they had been gardening and growing organically. And when they came to Austin, Texas, they found trying to garden in the caliche dirt was very difficult. So what they did was they looked around for the organic gardeners who were gardening successful gardens in Austin, and helped to bring them out to share their information through the club. And by the way, I hope that Anastasia has gotten to see, we have at least one article written by Josephine Huntley describing this coming around to Austin and forming the club, and how Charles Josephine were among those people who, before the chemicals of World War II, most gardens were organic and using inputs just found on the farm. And it wasn't until this juggernaut of modern scientific chemicals that chemical gardening became more the conventional gardening, and organic became the marginalized and the small set of people who, like Josephine and Charles mentioned, that they were just horrified that poisons were being poured on the living soils and living plants of these gardens, and they knew better. So they kept this information going, and until it finally came back around and it started booming again as the gardening that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for sharing that, Forrest. That was one of my questions, was how was it done before this? And I figured it was probably through gardening in different ways that they knew there was the organic methods.
Mm-hmm.
I remember Joan sharing how AOG was the only place in town at, pretty much where you could purchase the organic amendments, and how they used to order them in bulk and go meet railway cars at the train station to get the amendments, and then divide them in someone's garage so they could have them available for members.
A great story, because I remember it was phosphate from Florida that they were importing to Central Texas, and as their phosphate fertilizer, and it would come and they'd unload in Austin and ship the rest to Malcolm Beck down towards San Antonio, who was also a king of the organic gardening in Texas, and they did that for a number of years.
I inherited my father's Rodell books and from him, and they're all kind of falling apart. And we've had them many, many years. And I read them cover to cover in my 20s.
What a beautiful legacy.
Yeah.
So great. Yeah, so I was just going to end on a couple more slides. So while I was out foraging at Bull Creek, looking for chanterelles and dewberries this past year, I came across a victory garden. I turned down a path that I hadn't been down before, and I came across a victory garden that has interpretive markers, and anybody can go visit it. It's at the time, I imagine it was a very remote. It was probably already like a homestead with a lot of property, but I was able to find a historical, the daughter was interviewed from this family, and they have it in the History Center, the Austin History Center. And so what she shared was that she didn't recall any specific mandates on what chemicals or things to do. And it may be that she just wasn't super involved, but the main thing was that she remembers is they just wanted everyone to grow food, so that the government did not have to import, or companies didn't have to import as much food. So you can kind of see the remnants. You can see the old rock sort of barrier fence, and it's still fairly open. I was surprised it hadn't been taken over by cedars and whatnot and juniper trees, but you kind of see the before and after here. And so the next slide, I have a map that shows you where it is. I think that, yeah, there we go. So this is 360 here. And if you turn on the old Spicewood Springs Road, this will take you, or you can turn on the new Spicewood Springs Road, and there's a little couple parking areas where you can walk and hike on the trail and see the old Victory Garden.
Do they have a sign up?
There is, if you search for this location, that's the memorial trail to the Irving and Hazel Smith. And they have all types of historical markers along the trail. So it was a nice hike. It was pretty.
Is there any more questions tonight? Are we ready for that?
I did want to ask any members, there are a few things that we have on our wish list for fall seeds that we don't have collectively. So any to the left, black turtle or lima beans, endive or endive, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, collard and mustard greens, lemongrass, stalks, fall onions, and shallots. So Zilker is slated to reopen on September the 21st. There's a members only day on Sunday, September the 20th, and Cindy asked if we are ready, and we will be planting and adding to the beds according to Tim's lunar dates, that we could host, if we wanted to have some members there, something like an Ask AOG, where we could talk about our gardens with the members and answer vegetable garden questions. So if anyone has these things that they might be able to share with us for the demonstration beds, if you're interested in tending, joining us to tend or volunteer on that Sunday event, or even to talk to people maybe on Saturdays. The visitors are always very keen in what we're doing and asking questions. So, and I'm guessing a lot more of them vegetable gardening now.
Does anybody know what that means, reopen?
Well, I think that before they were doing a timed kind of ticket. It was just, and you have to purchase that in advance on the website. It was just as many people as there were parking spaces for a timed ticket. But I'm not sure, I haven't seen any new information added to the website. That is just what I've been hearing from Meredith.
It'll be the same on the 21st. It'll be online tickets only, and a limited number of cars will be allowed to come in. So, and volunteers after that date need to park down by the bev shed and make room for visitors.
So this is just a visitor garden only day, or what is that?
That's for, it's my understanding Cindy had said that they were going to do a day for members of the garden to come, and had asked, if we might be interested in this. According to numbers and things, there's always a lot of changes, but so far that seems to be the plan. So I thought I would share it and offer.
And so then when they reopen, do you know what that means? Other than the members day? I mean, does it?
When they reopen, it's the timed ticket.
It's the time ticket. Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And for us, we will still be able to garden. We have been gardening on Saturdays from 8 to 10 a.m. and we are able to enter through an employee gate. I'm not sure if we'll need to go to 9 when the garden opens. That's all kind of to be determined if they stay open.
So the members only day is just for
it's one day.
Garden? Or is there something planned?
No, there are no events planned. It's just a day, as I understand it, for members that they can buy timed tickets on the Sunday before it opens to the public on Monday the 21st.
Okay. Sorry. Need clarification.
No, does all that make sense?
Let us know, just reach out, and we'll be, as Madeline had mentioned, we're going to be continuing our fall garden series online on our social media. So any of our social media channels, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, you can follow along as we convert our beds and continue to dig for victory in Zilker. And also, if any members would like to have their garden featured or teach a lesson, we just went out to Aaron Hollis's house backyard and filmed some great videos on starts. She even gave us a picture of her in her prom dress, which is going to be great. We get to talk about her tool method of keeping all of the bugs out of her plants.
Protecting brassicas.
Yeah. So I hope everyone can make it next month. We have James Brown from Barton Springs Mills. And let's give Anastasia another round of applause for such a wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
Let us know if you have any questions, because we really haven't done that.
Oh, okay.
A couple people. Anyone else have questions? And in the chat, there's people saying what they want to donate.
Oh, awesome. Thank you. I'm sorry.
And Angel, I was curious if we are in touch with Anastasia to give her some of our articles that we come up with as we go through the historical records.
Sure.
That would be phenomenal.
Yeah, I can put, send out her email to everybody on the board.
Okay,
Does that sound good?
sounds good.
If you have a question for her, raise your hand or speak up.
This is Steve. I think you said that during the war that people in Victory Gardens were growing 40% of the vegetables consumed in the U.S. Is that what you said?
42% in 1943, according to USDA statistics.
So that's amazing. But you said that they were growing mostly cabbage and something else. It didn't sound like there was a lot of variety.
Oh, that was just an example of crops that were extra encouraged just because they could store easily in a root cellar. But there are definitely lots of oral histories of people who grew up in World War II. And this is endemic to anyone, especially a new gardener. And many of them were new gardeners in World War II, where there are people just saying, I remember all we ate was green beans for a month straight because mom planted too much. And you know, the problem all of us have with zucchini every year, there were so many memories of children, especially that's the only thing they remember about the Victory Garden that they'll mention in the oral history is, oh, we had to eat so much of whatever.
I'm just amazed that they could convince people and teach people how to garden so successfully, so fast. They had to be gardening all year long, rotating crops, and I'm just amazed that happened.
Oh, absolutely. It's without a doubt the fastest, basically overnight transformation of the way Americans ate in history. And that's part of why I think we need to look to it, because if we want to change our food systems again, what better place to look than the fastest and most radical reorganization of American food webs, when suddenly 42% of the vegetables were coming from people's own plots of land. It's just incredible. It still blows my mind, and I've been working on this topic for years.
Yep.
Yeah, I think a broad change could happen in terms of climate change, where people could carbon sequester in the same way through gardening in a broad scale, and could make a huge impact on climate change just by adopting the model of Victory Garden for a solution. And they you know, the Rodale Institute draws that out, how to do that exactly. And I think that could really be a new wave of how to make a change in our current climate.
And I think something that's really inspiring about the Victory Gardening movement is, as everyone at this club knows, gardening is work. It's not like convincing someone to switch from regular milk to oat milk. This is a lifestyle change that you're asking of people, and still people were willing to do it. People can be convinced and will find it rewarding and will stick with it. And I think that's just really hopeful about human nature, that people can be convinced to put so much time and energy and effort into something they've never tried before, and they're unsure if it's going to work because it's their first time, and work for such radical change so quickly. It makes me feel hopeful.
And we did the same thing for the pandemic. We all changed our behavior overnight. I mean, I think humanity has hopefulness to make big changes. And, we've demonstrated that this past 6 months.
Absolutely. Another great example.
Anastasia, I did have a question as I was doing my research. I didn't see a lot of regional influence, but I also I didn't see a Victory Garden plan from Texas, but we have, a lot of Tex-Mex and favorite things that we like to grow here. Was it really kind of a national diet at the time that was planted?
So that is such a great question. Especially in rural areas, there was much more variation, with local USDA extension services recommending more sweet potatoes and collard greens in the South, for instance, and way more, one of the only places potatoes almost become a regularly featured ingredient is in the Boston area. In the Massachusetts plants I've seen generally have potatoes, probably because of the huge Irish influence there. But World War II is incredibly important in the standardization of the American diet. Oh, I'm sorry if my internet's cutting out. World War II is incredibly important in the standardization of the American diet. And I actually think the Victory Garden movement was part of that, because largely these were nationally prescribed garden plans. Even outside Victory Gardens and these nationally prescribed garden plans, a huge number of people are eating food that is increasingly standardized in workplace cafeterias, on army bases. And this is really where the invention of what really before World War II had been an upper Midwest style diet of meat, potatoes, and greens really start to seen as more generic American style, is through especially the military forces in World War II.
Awesome, thanks. That's so interesting. I want to thank you too. I consulted with Anastasia on our plan because I did want it to be as closely aligned with a 1945 Victory Garden as I could. And I originally had potatoes and pumpkins on there, a small section, because I was thinking those were things that were easily stored.
Which was a good instinct.
But please share why they're not on there now.
Part of doing it the one correct way and producing as much as you could was there were lots of calculations where they said, in terms of square footage, you get fewer calories per square foot if you plant expensive sprawling things like pumpkins or squash, certain squashes. And so they didn't recommend those. And then potatoes, they were also very worried that they might be too much for beginners. All the continual mounding and the hilling might be too much for people to handle. And they'll get very discouraged because they won't be able to see them growing.
And the potatoes were sprayed. I saw.
Yes.
Pump and a powder and a pump type thing. Yeah.
Yes.
So interesting.
Thank you for putting in perspective the importance of our history and what information we can impart to add to, the organic movement from 1945. I don't think we quite realized that we were kind of an island there about that, and that was enlightening.
Yes, good point.
I mean, I love it, and part of what attracted me to this topic was because even though I was already trained to a master's in history, there was so much that Victory Gardens revealed to me too that I didn't know before, that made me look at World War II differently. So if my talk was illuminating to you, it's because it was very illuminating to me first.
Yeah. Something I wanted to say about your presentation, it was really great, but if you have things going on in the background, it makes it hard to turn the slides. So
yeah,
turn off all your other apps.
I actually did. I even quit my little sticky snap. The only thing I had open was Zoom. So
yeah,
my computer's getting a little old, too many archives trips.
Yeah. Well, it was great. You had good information. The slides were very readable. Your pace was really good. So everything was great.
Thank you. Thanks.
May I add a great resource that you can find online right now.
Absolutely.
I mentioned it to you, Anastasia, in the chat. The National Agricultural Library, which is a hop, skip, and a jump away from there too, in Beltsville, so it's also in Prince George's County. I'm from DC, so I'm very familiar with it. I actually also used to work for the USDA. Yes, I worked for the USDA when they were doing their 2017 agricultural census, which was quite interesting in and of itself, but that's another topic I can talk about. Yeah.
That's so cool.
Tell us more.
So, if you go to nal.usda.gov, that's their digital collections, and coincidentally to this talk, when you go in, the very first thing that you see when you scroll down to the bottom of the page, it says staff picks. And the very first thing says Organic Roots Digital Collection. And it says, interested in sustainable agriculture, explore a collection of historic USDA documents published before 1942.
Okay, wait, slow down, back
I'm
up.
sorry.
What was it you said again?
so
Staff
this-
picks, what?
Yes, so if this is nal.usda.gov, and this is the National Agricultural Library for the Department of Agriculture. And their staff pick, because there's nobody there in physical form at the moment, because DC is still pretty much locked. The DC metropolitan area is really locked down. Their staff pick is actually called Organic Roots Digital Collection. And it says, interested in sustainable agriculture, explore a collection of historic USDA documents published before 1942, containing information that could still be pertinent to today's farmers.
Really?
I just sent a link to everyone in the chat.
Yes. It actually specifies, it says, is an electronic collection of historic USDA documents, USDA documents published before 1942. And then it's in parentheses, before synthetic chemicals became widely used. And it says the documents in this collection were specifically chosen for their relevance to today's sustainable and organic farmers.
That's a great resource. Thanks so much.
So, and that's just coincidentally what was their staff pick. So unfortunately, they're not open. But I also have, besides myself working for USDA, I have a family connection. So, and it actually has a lot to do with soybeans and wartime. So my grandfather was a grain chemist.
Already.
And during, and back then, even, unlike now, where you have to get like a minimum like PhD to get a decent government job doing something like chemistry, back then, all you needed was your bachelor's. So we have letters from my grandmother to my grandfather when they were dating. They weren't even engaged yet, telling my grandfather to hurry up and finish his degree so he could get a good job, so he'd be exempt from the draft when the war came. This was in 1937, and that's actually exactly what happened. And so during the war, he was doing a lot of things. He was doing testing of soybean and flaxseed oil, because they were used for things like solvents, for paint, for soap. And then he also worked, actually, and apparently my grandfather was a leader on understanding what glutens were, because he did some of the first testing on the best way to get energy to the troops through the wheat. And he did testing on that. And that was right after the war started. And so the family story is that he used to bake cookies and bring them home to his kids during the war, because he got to make stuff, because he tested the grains to make sure it was the best that could go to the troops versus what came across. And he worked on a farm. Where the agricultural library is physically located now is actually next to a farm, where they did their testing. and it's still there. I mean, it's still the same place. This was
Eleanor Roosevelt visited during World War II to praise them for the work they were doing.
and apparently my grandfather also helped start the credit union, which is also still existing.
What credit union?
The USDA credit union, at least for his area, which still exists too. It's like, but yeah, I have a lot of family history in DC.
Marcia, if your father, if your family still has a collection of your father's papers, I would be very interested.
I actually have it right now.
I would be very interested in helping you find a repository, because I know several libraries that would fit their mission statement very well.
Well, they're all copies.
Oh, okay.
I mean, this is what he put together. I mean, he put together
I see.
and then he even did a full bibliography in chronological order, which is the proper way to do it.
It's amazing.
Because that's what my grandfather was like. But he also was involved in things that happened after the war, but were from the war itself, because we have a cassette tape of him from 1977 talking about how to protect your grain stores in case of nuclear fallout, which is obviously a byproduct of the war, which is a whole other topic. But you're talking about 1945, so he had it for a long time afterward.
Wow.
We had troops in two more undeclared wars before he retired. So,
Marcia, I think some of us would like to maybe talk to you more about your work, and could you share your email address?
yes. It's actually fairly easy. It's my first name, my last name at gmail.com, but I will type it out.
In the chat, if you would.
Yes. I'm also actually an historian by passion. I study military and social history of the mid-20th century. And so my biggest thing is how the two intersect, and that would be the home front. So how social movements, how like the women's rights movement, the African American civil rights movement, gay rights movement, disability rights movements impacted how things were dealt with in the military, and how what was going on in the military affected what was going on in the home front.
Really important stuff.
Very
Right in
important.
my out.
Yeah, we didn't get to touch on much of the role of the apartheid that was going on here in America during World War II. That's almost something anytime it comes up, I have to frame it like we were in apartheid.
Oh, absolutely.
And even the African Americans that were drafted into World War II, they had to be trained. You can watch videos on YouTube now of the training that the government shared with these soldiers that explained to them why they had more freedom in Europe, where they were going to fight war. It's just heartbreaking, but there's just so much there. That's a whole nother topic.
Well,
and I'm glad, Marcia,
the National Museum of African American History and Culture reopens on Friday.
oh, good.
It does.
Looks like Anita wrote that she has some things available in the chat for free if anybody wants to contact her. Her email's in there.
Oh, good. Thanks, Anita.
Also, I research for fun. So.
Well, I can tell you're passionate.
Yeah.
All right. Any more questions tonight? I think
I shared with everyone in the chat also, since it's been such an interesting topic and conversation this evening, if you'd like to learn further information here, further presentations, Anastasia has a blog called The Historian in the Garden. And I really enjoyed listening to the podcast and several things when I was doing my research for the design.
That's very kind of you. Thank you.
Thanks for your work and continued best wishes.
Yes, thank you so much, Anastasia.
Well, I'm so glad we got to meet online because people don't live here, and this, might not have happened.
Right. Definitely one of the small silver linings of COVID is I would not imagine I would have been able to get down to Austin to give this talk, and this has been delightful.
Oh yeah, we're just loving this. Come from all over and making our message much broader to a wider audience than we ever would have imagined before COVID. So, and I think the message needs to get out.
It's an important message. You guys are doing fantastic work.
Oh, thank you. We try.
You've been so inspiring, my contact with you guys. So thank you.
One of the slogans of the club is cultivating community, or we cultivate community. And, all the slogans of, getting through this together and learning together, we are all so much stronger when we share tips and information.
Since we're all stuck at home looking for something to do, I just posted in the chat that the Native Plant Society of Texas is having a Zoom meeting tomorrow evening about how to make a pocket prairie in a small place. So that's something that some of you are interested in.
I'm very interested in that.
We need one of those at school. Yes. To watch.
Well, we're
Thanks for sharing.
talk. I think we need to probably sign off unless there's any other urgent questions.
And do feel free to follow up with me by email. I'll be following up with Angel about the historians I'm contacting. So I hope you continue to view me as a resource because I'd love to stay in touch and hear about everything that goes on.
Yeah, I really liked your idea of connecting with those teachers and creating a student project. We're really interested in that.
Great. I'll let them know, and then if they have any student that's looking for a project, they'll know where to send them.
Great. Would love that. All right.
Thank you so much, Anastasia.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Danielle and Gareth, for contacting about the donations also. I got your info. Thank you.
Okay, good night.